Hey, good morning, guys. I know it's been a while since you guys heard from me, but I wanted to hop on here and begin to share something with you guys, and something that God has really been speaking with me over the last couple of weeks. And so I got up this morning and I just felt such a strong urgency to hop on here and to share with you what the Lord has been sharing with me. And for the last couple of weeks, the Lord has been speaking about unauthorized reconnections. And I say, okay, Lord, where are we going from here? And the Lord spoke to me. He said, I want you to talk to the people concerning the danger of unauthorized reconnection. And what God is really saying, that whenever he cuts a cord, whenever he disconnects a cord, that we shouldn't try and go and rewire what he has disconnected. And when the Spirit of the Lord began to deal with me concerning this, my mind went back to me when I was much younger, and how before technology got so advanced, because now at the push of a button, you don't have to have a technician to come out to turn off your cable, to disconnect your internet. And things have advanced now, but I remember back in the days when people would be scheduled for their cable to be turned on and their internet to be turned on, and even their water, that it would require a technician to come out personally to connect those things. And I remember there were times where people got cable installed. You would see the technician. He would have to climb the pole and connect the cable, and he would have to climb the pole to connect the internet. And as far as the water, he would come out with a utensil and he would just turn the water on. And I remember, and they just didn't come out to connect service. But if it ever got to a situation where the services came to a place of having to be turned off, and they would come out and disconnect the cable the way that they installed the cable. And one thing that I want you to understand, that they just didn't come out and shut it off just to shut it off, because there were certain things that had to transpire. There were certain things that transpired that gave them the permission to come out and to turn those things off. And it may be because the bill wasn't paid, a rule was broken, it may have been the contract simply ending. But no matter what the reason was, but whenever they turned it off, they had a reason to turn it off. And after they had a reason of turning it off, it then became official and it was recorded in their office. And once it was disconnected, the account then was marked are being flagged. So in other words, that means that if anyone tried to go out and to turn the cable back on or the water back on without permission, it became a problem. And it was, back then it was considered as stealing. It was it was considered as tampering or using services illegally. And they, back then, I saw some people face real consequences, and sometimes they would do an investigation and they would come around and knock on doors and they would ask you if you saw brother so and so climb the pole to reconnect their cable, or did you see sister so and so in the late night hour go out and turn the water back on. And not only that, but they were fined, and some even caught criminal charges. Now let's think about it in the realm of the spirit, how there are moments, y'all, when we walk with God, and when we walk with God, and then sometimes God will personally step in and he will begin to disconnect us from things, because I look at him as, we call the ones that would climb the pole to install the internet or cable, we call them technicians. But let's talk about the master technician this morning, the one who knows what exactly needs to be shut off. And I'm telling you, sometimes God removed people and places or situations from our lives. He will cut off relationships. He will take us out of certain environments and free us from wrong ways of thinking. And even in the midst of God disconnecting, he would disconnect things so that he can close doors, even to people that we have trusted in, and jobs that we have relied on, a group of people that we felt like that we were so close to, that they were more to us, just like a family. But just like that technician, he didn't just come out just to disconnect services because he was disconnecting, because there was something that had to happen for him to disconnect those services. And what are you saying, prophet? What I'm saying is just like God. God disconnection is not just random. God knows exactly what he's doing. And sometimes whenever God disconnected, it's not coming from a place of him punishing us, but it's a place that he's coming from because he loves us. According to his wisdom and his ability to see what we can't see, y'all. And sometimes what God will do, he will disconnect us from things, people, and places to protect us and to prepare us for something better. And when I thought about it myself, I said, God separates us from people or situations. Sometimes because they are no longer spiritually on the same page we are. And sometimes, y'all, it can be simply because the season has changed. And the connection has run its course. And one thing that I know, y'all, that God, he disconnects us as an act of his mercy, pulling us out of places that we thought was fine on the outside, but it was very harmful for us deep within. And I just want to talk to a couple of people this morning to let you know that God has the ability to see trouble before we can ever see it. Because one thing that I know, that sometimes God would disconnect when it doesn't make sense to us. Because God is an all-seeing God. He's an all-knowing God. He's an all-hearing God. Because sometimes God even knows what's been said behind our backs. He can see the real intention behind what I call fake smiles. So out of the deep love of God, he cared enough for us, y'all, that he will cut the cord, not to hurt us, but to protect us. Because how many of y'all know sometimes God disconnect because he wants us. He wants to keep our purpose pure. And he wants to keep our anointing strong. And he wants to preserve and protect us for our future. But let's talk about the danger. Sometimes when we go back to the things that God has already told us to leave behind. And sometimes some of us go back because we feel so emotionally tired. Some of us, we miss the good memories. And not only that, but a lot of us, we go back because we have a fear of being alone. And not only that, just like me, you want to always keep other people happy. When it causing you to reconnect what God has already disconnected. And just like me, I've been in a place where sometimes we can allow old feelings of past connections to guide us instead of listening to the voice of God. And when we do this, y'all, we begin to not only rebel against God, but we begin to ignore the warning. And I remember God used to speak to me and I would ignore the warning. I remember God telling me and asking me, why are you trying to fix what I've already ended. Hekatabatsi. And that's my question to you this morning. What are you trying to fix what God has already ended? And I used to find myself trying to restart what God had already shut down. And like I said earlier, it was like I was trying to rewire things with my feelings instead of trusting God. But as I continue to do these things, I find myself positioning myself in spiritual danger. Because I was trying to take back people, places, and habits that God had already disconnected. The things that God say, you're connected to it, but it ain't good for you. And I just want to talk to a couple of people this morning. And I don't know if you guys ever looked at the movie called Get Out. There was a main character by the name of Chris, and he got into this relationship. He went to a place that seemed safe and welcomed him at first. In the beginning to Chris in the movie, it looked like it was love and acceptance. But as time went on, Chris began to see the truth. Because the people that Chris thought cared about him were actually using him, and they were controlling him in a very dangerous way. In other words, everything had become fake around him. And when you begin to look at the movie, you can literally see that Chris had warning signs, and he had something that was speaking to him deep within, that positioned him to the place of something just isn't right. And when you begin to look at the movie, you begin to see that Chris came to the point of taking a bold step where he began to escape the houses and the people who were trying to trap him. In other words, he left that life behind. And when he left it, y'all, he never returned back to it. Because at the end of the movie, you would see that Chris had a friend by the name of Rod that came to rescue him. And when you watch the movie, you would see that Chris finally got away. But Chris had to make a choice. He had to make a decision. He had to take a bold step. And this is what God is saying. We got to be like Chris. Willing to take a bold step to be able to break free. And y'all, one thing that I know and one thing that I've experienced in life, that when God disconnects us from something or someone, is for our protection. But if we choose to go back and reconnect what God has already removed, y'all, then we put ourselves in a whirlwind of trouble. And I remember going back into some things that God disconnected. And once I got back into in reconnection with those things, I can feel that I was trapped. Because where there was peace, it had now become stressful. And I just want to talk back. I want to talk to some people, because when we ignore the voice of God and we force our way back into old places and old relationships and old habits, we end up stuck. We put ourselves in a place where we're no longer able to grow. We can't move forward. And I remember rebelling against God, and I didn't care what God was saying. I was trying to reconnect. And as I was reconnecting to God, told me, he said, the more you try to reconnect to what I've disconnected, God told me, he said, you're making yourself your own prisoner in your own life and the calling that I have on your life. And the reason why I wanted to share this movie, Get Out, because Chris' story shows what final freedom looks like. Leaving behind what was dangerous and never going back or trying to reconnect to what he left behind. And how many of y'all know that when God sets you free, going back is not an option? And God told me, he said, son, the reason why going back is not an option, because he said real healing means closing the door and keeping it shut for good. Now let's go back and talk about the penalty in the realm of the spirit. When we decide to go back and reconnect what God has already disconnected. And just like reconnecting the power of the cable without permission in the natural, which led to trouble, God began to reveal to me, he said, son, the same way it is in the realm of the spirit. But God told me, he said, but the spiritual consequences are even more dangerous. And I said, God, why is it more dangerous? And God told me, because they often show up slowly. And people are not able to notice them right away. And God told me, he said, a lot of them notice it not right away, but they notice it when the damage has already been done. So I've learned, y'all, that when you go against God, against his direction, and you reconnect with something or someone he's removed from your life, God say then you begin to form spiritual chains that cause you to go in the same cycles. So let's talk about one of the penalties that you deal with when you decide to go and reconnect with God has disconnected. And one of the things when God was talking to me, God say spiritual stagnation. In other words, you stop growing spiritually. Yeah, you can still be in the church singing, you can still be behind the pulpit preaching, and you can still be serving faithfully, or you can be leading Bible study, but everything feels dry. There's no flow. There's no power. There's no breakthrough. And I asked God, say, why is it that there's no flow? Why there's no power? Why there's no breakthrough? And the Lord spoke to me, the Holy Spirit say, because people are plugged into something that has no divine voltage. My God. In other words, God say, it's a dead circuit. And I said, God, what do you mean? And God said, son, let me give you an illustration. He said, it was just like King Saul, still sitting on a throne after I had shifted the anointing to David. So let me just talk to you. You may still have a title, but the oil has been lifted. The oil has been lifted. And with the Spirit of the Lord began to reveal to me about the danger of reconnecting what he's already disconnected. He said, son, you have to be careful that it don't contaminate your calling. And I said, God, what do you mean that when it can contaminate your calling? Because God began to show me, he said, in the beginning, your calling, which was once clear and pure, it then's become diluted. And I said, God, how is it that it becomes diluted? And God spoke to me. He said, when you find yourself reconnecting back to toxic relationships, old habits, familiar spirits, and this one got me, he said, are expired assignments. And when God told me, he said that when they reconnect back to this thing, son, he said the only thing it does, it clouds their discernment. And I said, God, what do you mean that it begins to cloud their discernment? And God began to tell me, he said, one way you can see that their discernment has become clouded because they begin to interpret emotions as confirmation. They begin to confuse fleshly desire for spiritual peace. Am I talking to somebody this morning? And then even when they put themselves in a place where their call become contaminated, the voice of God becomes hard for them to distinguish. And God told me, he said, then they begin to start making decisions from a place of fear or a place of pressure rather than clarity. And God told me, he said, son, when this happens to them, then they put themselves in a place where it's almost like a double-minded man walking. And then he have walked himself into a place of position where he then becomes vulnerable to deception. Am I talking to somebody this morning? And the next thing that God began to deal with me concerning how when we try to reconnect, y'all, what he's already disconnected, he says, son, it can cause people's destiny to be delayed. And just think about it, y'all. Time is valuable when it comes to the realm of the spirit. And God told me, he said, son, every moment a person spends not listening to me, but trying to reconnect to things that I've already disconnected. He say, the more time they try to reconnect, it takes away from their purpose. In other words, y'all, what should have taken 6 months, now taking 6 years. Because you're trying to reconnect to some things that God has disconnected. You're trying to reconnect to some things that God has disconnected you from. And I'm telling you, God began to give me a revelation. He had me to look in the book of Deuteronomy, the first chapter, verse 2, and it talks about when the children of Israel was going through the wilderness. Could I help somebody this morning? The trip should have only taken 11 days. But the children of Israel wind up making it 40 years. Why, prophet? Because as God was trying to not only get them out of the wilderness physically, but he was also trying to bring their mind out as well. And notice, y'all, it wasn't so much of the physical aspect that kept them in the wilderness. It was their mind. Because every time that God was trying to disconnect them mentally, there were times they would try and go back to reconnect themselves mentally after God has already disconnected them. Prove it to me, prophet. When you look at Exodus, the 14th chapter, verses 11 through 12. This is when they was at the Red Sea. The scripture says, they said to Moses, why is it? Because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die. What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians. This is what got me. And they say it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. God is talking to somebody. So what happened to the children of Israel is that they delayed their process. They delayed their progress. Because God was trying to get them to the promise. But because they were not willing to disconnect their mind from Egypt, it became a struggle. It became a struggle. And a lot of y'all right now is in a place of struggling of struggling, but it's not because you have to. It's unnecessary struggle simply because you refuse to disconnect mentally. But God is already disconnected from you. But instead of you disconnecting, it seems like that you're trying to connect even the more. My God. And as I was sitting here, God spoke to me. Something so strong and so profound. And the Lord told me, he said, son, the enemy does not always need to try and ruin a person's life or their calling. The only thing he needs to do is slow them down enough so that they will miss their moment. My God. This is what God is saying. The enemy just not after your calling. But if he can just get you to slow down enough so that you can miss your moment. I'm getting ready to be real with y'all because I found out that I've learned to talk about myself, because when you talk about other people or people feel like that you're talking about them, they get mad and they get upset and they get easily offended. So I'm going to talk about myself because I remember the time, y'all, I would openly rebel against God. I'm talking about willfully, openly rebel against God. I mean, I was rebelling in such a way. Well, while I was rebelling against God, God was still talking to me. And I remember I was trying to reconnect some things while God had already disconnected some things. And I remember God telling me, son, keep reconnecting. Because the only thing that is doing for you is moving you out of position where you no longer remains under my covering. And even though y'all God was speaking, I was still rebelling. I was still trying to reconnect with God had already disconnected. And I find myself in a place of experiencing level of warfare that I couldn't handle. Because I removed myself from up under the covering of God. Simply because I wanted to reconnect with God. I had already disconnected. Found myself being in a place of confusion. Didn't know if I was going left or right. Didn't know if I was going forward or backwards. Because I was so interested in reconnecting with God, I had disconnected. Still with a spirit of heaviness. Still with a spirit of sekakandio shadarabatsi. Still with a spirit of suicide. All because I wanted to reconnect what God had disconnected. You know, I got to a place where I could no longer blame God. I had to look at myself. I started dealing with the spirit of fear. And not only that, y'all, but just me trying to reconnect with God disconnected. It created a cycle. And it was a cycle that I thought that I could never, ever come out of. And then I broke down and I asked him, I said, Lord, what is going on? He said, I talked to you previously, but you ignored me. And the Lord began to tell me, he said, let me tell you the reason why you're experiencing all of the confusion, why you're dealing with the spirit of heaviness, why you're dealing with a suicidal spirit. Because he said, when you went back to reconnect what I disconnected, the unauthorized reconnections invited interference. And it gave the enemy the legal right and the legal ground to operate. Operate against your mind. Operate against your body. Operate against you mentally. Operate against you emotionally. Could I just be real, y'all? There's a price you pay when you try to go and reconnect what God has disconnected. And I remember, y'all, it came a season when I was trying to reconnect what God has disconnected. It's like there was a tiredness in my soul. I was fatigued. I was drained. It's like I couldn't go on. And I remember God telling me, he said, son, when I disconnect you from people, places, and things, and you try to reconnect back to them, he said, it drains you. And I remember God telling me, he said, that's why you're tired in your heart. That's why you're weary in your mind. That's why you're carrying stress and problems that wasn't never meant from you, because you were willing to try to reconnect. Well, I've already disconnected. And I remember the Lord telling me, he said, son, instead of you working with me to help you, you decided to do it on your own. And that's what's wearing you out. Or that's what wore you out. Y'all, I got to a place where I was so burned out. I became bitter. I emotionally shut down. I didn't have joy to help others. Worship felt like it was a task. It was hard for me to pray, y'all. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't feel the peace. It was like me driving a car empty. And I was running low. I was running off of fumes. Why? Because I chose to step outside of the covering of God. And I just want to talk to a couple of people this morning. And what God is saying, he said, I disconnected it for a reason. And as the Spirit of the Lord is saying, stop trying to make eternal what is only meant to be seasonal. Stop calling covenant what I've only called a lesson. Now I hear the Spirit of the Lord saying this morning, he said, let go before it becomes your limitation. And y'all, just like I said earlier, when God disconnects you, it's not to punish you. It's to prepare you. And I asked God, I said, what do you mean? He says, preparing you because in your preparation, I'm making room for your upgrade. I'm making room for your refinement. I'm making room for your true alignment. Lord, I hear you. And I just want to encourage you this morning. Allow God to continue to cut the cords. Continue to allow him to disconnect. Because he's only preserving your oil. He's protecting your voice. And he's protecting your assignment. But y'all, that'll only work if you can just trust God and trust him with his scissors and allow him to cut, allow him to disconnect. And you have to come to a place of refusing to pick up the wires and try to reconnect what God has already disconnected. And y'all, unauthorized reconnection in the spirit realm doesn't just delay you. It has the potential to destroy what God has in store for you. So before I go, I just want to encourage a couple of people. Don't risk your next season trying to revive something that have already expired. If he cuts it, don't try to splice it. If he's already ended it, don't try to resurrect it. Continue to let God disconnect what he needs to disconnect so he can download what truly belongs to you. And I just wanted to share that. Yeah, God. And I just wanted to come and talk to a couple of people. Don't let what God has disconnected and you try to reconnect it cause you to be stagnated. Allow it to contaminate your calling. Don't allow it. Don't allow it to delay your destiny. So once again, y'all, continue to let God disconnect what he wants to disconnect so he can download what truly belongs to you. Y'all continue to pray for me as I continue to pray for you, and enjoy the rest of your day.